It's happening quietly, and that's why most people miss it. Right now, there's a subtle but powerful shift moving through your inner world, one that doesn't announce itself with chaos or dramatic events, but instead with a strange emotional stillness you may not have felt before. Venus is forming a healing connection with Chiron, and this isn't about romance in the way most people think. It's about identity. It's about the version of you that was created during moments when you needed protection, approval, or survival more than truth. And that version is beginning to loosen its grip. You may have noticed it already. You don't feel the same urgency to impress. Conversations that once felt exciting now feel exhausting. Attention doesn't hit the way it used to. Validation lands flat. And there's a quiet part of you wondering why your spark feels different, why your motivation has shifted, why the things that once mattered so much suddenly feel distant. This isn't you losing yourself. This is you outgrowing a version of yourself that was built for a chapter you no longer live in. Most identities are not chosen consciously. They are formed in moments of emotional impact, a moment of rejection, a moment of embarrassment, a moment when you learned that being yourself wasn't enough, so you adapted. Maybe you became the achiever, believing success would make you safe. Maybe you became the pleaser, thinking agreement would protect you from abandonment. Maybe you became the strong one, the funny one, the impressive one, the low-maintenance one. These identities weren't flaws. They were strategies. They were intelligent, necessary responses to the reality you were in at the time. But Venus touching Chiron brings something uncomfortable and honest to the surface. It asks you to feel what those identities were protecting you from without needing to keep wearing them. And when that happens, it can feel like grief. Not because something bad is happening, but because something familiar is ending. You're not grieving a person. You're grieving the role you played to survive. And grief doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it comes as detachment. Sometimes it comes as disinterest. Sometimes it comes as a quiet withdrawal from things that used to define you. You may feel less social, less expressive, less eager to perform, and a part of you might worry that you're fading. But this isn't decline. This is recalibration. Your magnetism is shifting away from performance and toward presence. You're no longer being fueled by the need to be seen a certain way. You're becoming rooted in who you actually are when no one is watching. That kind of grounding can feel dull at first, especially if you're used to intensity. But it's not dullness, it's stability. This shift also changes how you experience desire, what you're drawn to, who you're drawn to, and why. People who once felt magnetic may suddenly feel draining. Dynamics that once felt exciting may now feel heavy. The emotionally unavailable no longer feel mysterious. The chaotic no longer feel passionate. The ones you used to want to fix, save, or chase may now feel like work you're no longer willing to do. This can be confusing because your old attraction patterns were tied to emotional familiarity, not truth. Venus doesn't heal by making pain disappear. It heals by removing your tolerance for it. And when the wound stops leading, the patterns built on it collapse. You may notice you're less reactive, less triggered, less interested in proving yourself. At first, that neutrality can feel like boredom, like something is missing. But what's missing is the adrenaline of old wounds being activated. What's emerging instead is discernment, calm, choice. This is also a moment when your relationship with your appearance, your image, and your self-presentation begins to shift. You may look at old photos and feel disconnected. Clothes, styles, aesthetics that once felt empowering may suddenly feel like costumes. Not because they were wrong, but because they belonged to a version of you that needed armor. For a long time, many people used their appearance as communication, a way to say, "I'm worthy, I'm confident, I belong," without ever speaking it out loud. But when identity shifts internally, the outside wants to follow. You might feel the urge to simplify, or to radically change, or to stop caring about certain trends altogether. These impulses aren't random, they're signals. They're your inner world asking the outer world to finally reflect who you are becoming, not who you had to be. When your style stops being about approval and starts being about expression, confidence changes. It becomes quieter, less performative, more solid. Relationships feel this shift deeply. You may notice you're no longer willing to over-explain yourself to someone who isn't listening. You're less patient with inconsistency, less interested in fighting for bare minimum effort. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe for daily cosmic insights, astrology updates, and spiritual guidance, because the universe always has a message for you. You start seeing clearly how much emotional labor you were doing just to keep certain connections alive, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Love that requires constant performance begins to feel heavier than being alone. This doesn't mean you're becoming cold, it means you're becoming honest. You're caring with boundaries now. You're caring without self-abandonment. You're no longer trying to earn love by shrinking, fixing, or overgiving. And that clarity can feel strange at first. It can feel like you're losing interest, when in reality you're losing illusion. You're no longer mistaking intensity for intimacy, or chaos for chemistry. This is the part of spiritual awakening that rarely gets glamorized. It doesn't look radiant. It looks awkward. It looks like questioning everything that once felt automatic. It looks like sitting in silence and realizing you don't want to keep playing the character you perfected. It can feel like confidence dissolving before it reforms into something truer. You're in between versions of yourself, too aware to go back, not fully settled into what's next. But this in-between space is sacred. It's where authenticity replaces survival. It's where desire shifts from compensation to creation. You stop reaching outward to feel whole and start choosing from a place of self-recognition. Your nervous system learns that peace doesn't mean boredom, and calm doesn't mean lack of passion. It means safety. As February unfolds, this energy continues to rearrange your inner priorities. You may speak more freely without rehearsing. You may choose silence without discomfort. You may express preferences without guilt. You may stop managing how you're perceived. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer need approval to exist. The version of you emerging now is not louder, shinier, or more impressive. It's lighter, steadier, more grounded. This self doesn't chase connection. It invites it. It doesn't need to be chosen by everyone. It resonates with the right few. It doesn't demand applause. It values alignment. And that's why the old identity is slipping away so naturally. You're not gripping it anymore. You're not investing energy into masks that feel heavy. You're not forcing yourself into roles that no longer fit. If you're feeling emotional without knowing why, detached without being numb, reflective without being lost, you're not alone. This is what happens when healing moves from the wound to the root. Let this shift happen gently. Let your identity reorganize without pressure. What's forming underneath is a version of you that doesn't need to prove its worth, because it finally knows it. And if this resonated, if it felt like someone put words to something you've been feeling quietly, sit with that. This isn't here to break you down. It's here to reveal who you're becoming. And that version of you is arriving sooner than you think. When the old patterns finally stop working, Something subtle continues after the initial shift, and this is where many people start feeling unsettled without knowing why. The old patterns don't disappear overnight, but they stop working. The strategies you once relied on to feel safe, loved, or relevant suddenly feel ineffective. You might catch yourself responding the way you always have, only to feel an immediate internal resistance, like your system is quietly saying, "This doesn't fit anymore." You may notice moments where you start to explain yourself the way you used to, and halfway through you feel tired. Not because the situation is heavy, but because you can sense how unnecessary the effort is. You may feel the urge to people-please rise automatically, then dissolve just as quickly. It's not discipline stopping you, it's awareness. The part of you that once stepped in to manage perception, smooth tension, or earn approval is losing momentum. This is often where frustration shows up. Not dramatic frustration, but a low-level irritation with yourself. You might think, "Why am I still doing this?" Or, "Why does this feel so fake now?" That irritation isn't self-judgment, it's misalignment becoming visible. You're no longer unconscious inside behaviors that once ran on autopilot. Venus and Chiron working together don't just heal emotional wounds, they expose emotional habits. They highlight how often your responses were shaped by fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. And once you see that clearly, your body no longer cooperates with the performance. The nervous system starts choosing rest over reaction. You may also notice that certain emotional triggers don't land the same way anymore. Comments that once would have stayed with you all day now pass through more quickly. Situations that once made you spiral now feel strangely neutral. At first, this can feel like detachment or emotional numbness, but it's not numbness, it's regulation. It's your system no longer mistaking threat for familiarity. This is where many people feel like they're losing intensity. But intensity was never proof of depth. Often, it was proof of activation, proof that something unresolved was being touched. What's replacing it now is clarity. And clarity can feel quiet, especially if you've lived most of your life in emotional overdrive. You're not becoming passive, you're becoming intentional. You're not shutting down, you're filtering. You're learning the difference between responding and reacting, between engaging and overextending. And that learning phase can feel awkward because you're still unlearning reflexes that once kept you safe. If you feel like you're pausing more, pulling back more, observing more, trust that. This isn't avoidance. This is discernment being rebuilt from the inside out. Your energy is recalibrating, and recalibration always looks slower before it looks clearer. The identity void no one warns you about. After the old identity loosens and the old patterns stop working, there's a phase that very few people talk about. The space in between, the identity void. This is the moment where you're no longer who you were, but you don't fully know who you're becoming yet. And for many, this is the most uncomfortable part of spiritual awakening. You may feel undefined, not lost, but unanchored. The labels you once used to describe yourself don't feel accurate anymore. The roles you played no longer feel natural, and the future version of you hasn't fully formed yet. This can create a strange sense of emptiness, not because something is missing, but because something old has exited before the new has settled in. In this phase, comparison becomes especially unhelpful. Looking at people who seem confident, certain, or established can trigger doubt. Not because you want their life, but because you feel temporarily formless. And the mind doesn't like formlessness. It wants definition. It wants certainty. It wants a storyline. But this phase is not meant to be defined. It's meant to be felt. You might feel less motivated to chase goals that once drove you, not because you lack ambition, but because the motivation behind those goals has changed. When desire was rooted in proving yourself, it created urgency. Now that the proving has dissolved, desire is being rebuilt on truth, and that takes time. This is also when solitude can feel both comforting and confronting. You may enjoy being alone more, yet feel uneasy with how quiet everything is. You may realize how much noise you once used to distract yourself from listening inward. And now, with fewer distractions, your inner voice becomes louder, not demanding, just honest. The temptation in this phase is to rush the rebirth, to force a new identity, a new aesthetic, a new label, a new path, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. But this space is not meant to be escaped. It's meant to be inhabited, because this is where authenticity actually forms, not from reaction, but from presence. You're learning who you are when no one needs anything from you, when you're not being evaluated, when you're not being chosen or rejected, when you're not performing. That version of you can feel unfamiliar at first because it's been quiet for a long time, but it's steady and it's real. If you feel like you're floating between versions of yourself, you're not behind. You're exactly where this shift places you. This is the pause between survival and selfhood, and it matters more than you realize. The quiet confidence that changes everything. Eventually, without you forcing it, something begins to settle. The noise quiets, the urgency fades, and in its place, a new kind of confidence starts to form. Not the loud kind, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that doesn't need reinforcement. You may notice you're no longer explaining your choices to everyone. You don't feel the need to justify why something feels right or wrong for you. You trust your internal signals more. You leave situations earlier. You say no without rehearsing. You say yes without anxiety. And none of it feels dramatic. It feels normal. This is where the realignment becomes visible externally. Your relationships start shifting naturally. Some fade without conflict. Some deepen without effort. New connections feel calmer, clearer, less confusing. You're drawn to people who feel emotionally available, grounded, and consistent. Not because you decided to change your standards, but because your nervous system no longer tolerates instability. Your sense of self becomes less reactive. You're not scanning for approval. You're not bracing for rejection. You're present. And presence is magnetic in a way performance never was. People may comment that you seem calmer, more centered, more yourself. Even if they can't explain what's different, they'll feel it. This is also when joy starts returning, but in a quieter form. Not the rush of being chosen or admired, but the peace of being aligned. You enjoy things because you enjoy them, not because they reinforce an image. You express yourself because it feels true, not because it earns validation. Life feels less like something you have to manage and more like something you get to experience. The identity forming now isn't built on fear, it's built on clarity. It doesn't need to impress, it doesn't need to compete, it doesn't need to rush. It trusts its timing. It knows that what's meant to connect will connect without force. And this is why this Venus-Chiron shift matters so deeply. Not because it creates instant change, but because it initiates lasting reorganization. It moves you out of survival-based identity and into authenticity-based existence. It teaches you that you don't need to become more to be worthy. You need to become more honest. If you've felt quieter lately, softer, more selective, more inward, don't resist that. You're not disappearing. You're integrating. You're not losing your edge. You're refining it. The version of you emerging now doesn't need to prove itself to be powerful. It simply is. And when you finally look back, you'll realize this wasn't the moment everything fell apart. It was the moment everything finally aligned.